Daniel chapter 1. The third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And Yahweh gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of Yahweh, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his Elohim. He brought the vessels into the treasurer's house of his Elohim. And the king spoke to Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed, and the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding science, and such as had the ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach and learn in the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now Yahweh had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, whom has appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, and Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days. Let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. As for these 4 children, Yahweh gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them. And among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the 1st year of King Cyrus. We'll be looking at the topic of integrity as found in the book of Daniel. And Webster defines integrity as firm adherence to a code of especially moral or artistic values, incorruptibility, unimpaired condition, soundness, the quality or state of being complete or undivided, completeness, is closely related to the word honesty, defined as doing what you say and saying what you do. It is where word and deed are in agreement. It is sticking to your guns no matter what the circumstances. Sounds easy, but it's not. What do you do when the pressure to change builds in your life? The problem we have is physical, emotional, and spiritual pressure. Now, Daniel found himself in a pressure situation. His life was in turmoil at every level. His emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being was being threatened by the world events. Physically, he had been taken away from his familiar surroundings by the conquering king. Uprooted from Jerusalem, he was taken to Babylon as a slave to live out the rest of his life in service to King Nebuchadnezzar. Perhaps he was to be well-treated slave, but a slave nonetheless. Emotionally, he was in turmoil. Now, my next move will be when they take my body out of the house for burial, because I hate moving. Daniel was taken forcibly from his home as a foreign land in chains. We cannot imagine how he was feeling. The emotional stress from such an event would be overwhelming. Now, spiritually, add to all of this seeing your place of worship sacked and ruined. His place of worship was destroyed, and his valuables taken as spoils back to Babylon. Verse 2 says, "And Yahweh delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles of the temple of Yahweh. These he carried off to the temple of his Elohim in Babylonia, and put them in treasure house of his Elohim." Imagine if someone came into our place of worship and destroying, robbing, and possibly killing. Do you think we would be stressed out and our lives be in turmoil? The sin of the people of Yahweh has finally taken its toll. Judgment had come. After all the warnings, Yahweh in his time allowed his people to be conquered. But in the midst of the judgment and turmoil, Yahweh had a divine plan for Daniel. Now, Daniel was evidently a very talented individual. He had a great many assets in his favor. He had what we would call potential. Evidently, he was intelligent, good-looking, and in great shape. The court official was asked to fill in order for the king. Verse 4 says the court official was to bring the king young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. Daniel was chosen for his prestigious position. It was going to be an easier life than an ordinary slave. He was to serve the king's court. It was a place of power and influence. What a great opportunity. But there was a snag. Daniel was being asked to fit in. He was to become, for all intent and purposes, a Babylonian. Verse 4, the end of verse 4 says, he was to teach them the language and literature of Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Daniel was in a difficult, stressful situation that was going to test his faith and principles at a fundamental level. The Israelite was in charge. The Israelite was to change into a Babylonian. How was he to meet this challenge? One way to deal with the pressures of our beliefs is to surrender. He could have sold out, simply give up and bow to the peer pressure, circumstances, or whatever is compelling you to change your beliefs. Nobody would have blamed him. He was out of town. When in Rome, do as the Romans. I find many believers are willing to give in and compromise or explain away the word of Yahweh. It would have been easy for Daniel to go along with the program. With its gifts and talents, he would have been successful in the king's court. Another way he could have handled it was to lie about what he was doing, keep the court official and the king in the dark, and do everything behind their back. No one would have been the wiser. Just eat, drink what you want in keeping with Yahweh's laws, but pretend to be obedient. Fake everyone out. Perhaps this would have been a little more complicated, but again, the easy way out as well as dishonest. It would not have honored Yahweh while trying to honor Yahweh. Many are willing to tell a little white lie as long as the circumstances warrant the lie. We like to put sin in order of degrees. Some sins are worse than others in our eyes. It's okay to break the little ones, but not the big ones. Yahweh does not desire selective obedience, nor does he recognize degrees of sin. So how did Daniel handle it? He stood his ground by offering a solution. Daniel offered a win-win solution to his problem. He found an answer that allowed him to obey Yahweh and obey the laws of the king. First, he resolved not to defile himself or disobey Yahweh. In verse 8 it says, "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief officer for permission not to defile himself this way." The cadet's prayer is said at every Sunday chapel at West Point. Make us choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong. Never be contented with half-truth when whole truth can be won. Endow us with courage that is born of loyalty to all that is noble and worthy, that scorns to compromise with vice and injustice, and knows no fear when right and truth are in jeopardy. Daniel had precepts in place before the situation arose. And Carter defines a precept as a rule, instruction, or principle that guides somebody's action, especially one that guides moral behavior. Daniel's belief system allowed him to respond to the menu with confidence, not because he knew it all, but because Yahweh did. The second thing Daniel did was offer a solution that was a win-win. Test what I say and see if I'm right. Verse 12 and 13 says, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food. And treat your servants in accordance with what you see." Here's a story. My friend wanted a boat more than anything. His wife kept refusing, but he bought one anyways. "I'll tell you what," he told her. "In the spirit of compromise, why don't you name the boat?" Being a good sport, she accepted. When her husband went to the docks for her maiden voyage, the name of his boat was painted on the side, "For sale." Daniel went in with confidence because he knew where he stood, and he knew Yahweh would honor him if he honored Yahweh. The response was that the official agreed. Verse 14 says, "So he agreed to this and tested him for 10 days. The outcome of the test was that Daniel and his friends, were successful. Most of this room knows that before I said it, And at the end of time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, and Mishael or Azariah. So they entered the king's service in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the enchanters in his whole kingdom. They looked better and had responded better than anyone else in the entire kingdom. It's an amazing testament to Daniel and his friends. Right? No, it's wrong. Remember, it is not about Daniel, but about Yahweh. Verse 17 says, to those 4 young men, Yahweh gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. Yahweh worked in a powerful way in his life because he was willing to let Yahweh work in his life. So I got 2 questions at this point. My first is to parents. What precepts have you taught your children? I'm not talking to grandma and grandpas, but to parents. If your child were put in a difficult, stressful situation involving peer pressure or sacrifice or circumstances beyond their control, do they have the equipment necessary to meet the challenge? It is not only your responsibility to teach them, but to show them by your actions. It's never too late to start, but tomorrow may be too late. My next question is to everybody. What have you been taught? And have you made up your mind ahead of time how you would deal with certain situations that will no doubt come into your life? It is too late if you wait until it happens. You need to make the decision now how you will respond later. Daniel didn't all of a sudden become dedicated to Yahweh. He lived his life to Yahweh, and he was determined to do so no matter what. Can the same be said of our life? It has been said the swift wind of compromise is a lot more devastating than the sudden jolt of misfortune. It is not too late to begin living a life of integrity. Stop playing at church and worship in obedience to Yahweh's word, and begin to match word and deed. I'm not saying Yahweh will deliver you from your pain and suffering or even your circumstances, but he will enable you to live your life for him. It says in verse 21, and Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Yahweh did not miraculously free Daniel from slavery. He used him in a powerful way. William Barclay of the Apostles' Creed for Every Man said, Jesus did not say, discuss me. He said, follow me. We do not make terms with Christ. We surrender to Christ. We do not compromise with Christ. We submit to Christ. Christianity does not mean being interested in Jesus Christ. It means taking the same oath as princes take to a king or a queen in a coronation ceremony and saying, I am your liege man of life and limb and faith and truth, and I bear to you against all manner of folk. So help me God. Are you ready to begin today? Yeah, we bless.